In the 4th year of marriage to my sworn enemy. He had a car accident and lost his memory. His memory stopped before we got married. Seeing my wedding ring, he spoke with sarcasm. Who's so unlucky to marry you? I glanced at the gauze on his head and thought, dude, if I said it was you, I'm really afraid you'd have a cerebral hemorrhage. Never mind. Anyway, it's not you. When did you get married? 4 years ago. What was I doing at that time? I said with a smile, you gave me a big red envelope at that time. He lowered his eyes. That's impossible. For some reason, there was actually some loneliness between his beautiful eyebrows. Sure enough, this person is still not easy to deceive even when he has lost his memory. With our relationship, it's really impossible for him to give me a big red envelope. He should be thinking of putting laxatives in all the guests' meals so that my wedding can become the biggest joke in history. Looking at him lost in thought, my hand was faster than my brain. I reached out and pinched his face. Let's go. Go home. Home. His eyes suddenly lit up, as if seeing some kind of hope again. I quickly made up a reason in my mind. Well, the Kin family is bankrupt. Do you know that? Now you are my servant. Kin Xingye, who had been on the verge of breaking down all along, finally completely cracked at this moment. I did everything thoroughly and greeted all the servants at home in advance. I also agreed with his parents. In order to let Kin Xingye recuperate at home for a while with peace of mind, I'll deceive him first. So that he won't worry about company affairs. So when he was in the car and still had a glimmer of hope. When he called his parents to verify. The answer he got was, son, our family is really bankrupt. He put down his phone, his eyes slightly red. The young master who was once favored by heaven has now truly become a penniless poor boy. After a long while, he finally spoke in a low voice, so, what do I do at your house? A lot. Washing clothes, cooking, serving tea and pouring water. Oh, and also washing my feet. He turned his head and looked out the window. His cold and stern profile added a sense of fragility in such low spirits. Who wouldn't sigh and say, what a pitiful sweetheart? I was almost crazy with joy in my heart but still had to hold back my laughter on the surface. You should know that Kin Xingye is usually a domineering and arrogant high mountain flower. His life path is that of a favored son, with a real dragon attached to him. All the way with sparks and lightning. I once asserted that if I could ever see Kin Xingye's eyes redden for me, it should be at my funeral. These words reached Kin Xingye's ears. After hearing it, he said with a smile, are you thinking too much? At the funeral, I will only come and set off firecrackers for you. Now seeing him so vulnerable is simply extremely satisfying. I held back my laughter all the way and returned home. As soon as I entered the door, I went to the study to deal with the accumulated documents first. When I returned to my own room, I suddenly saw Kin Xingye standing in my room. In front of him was also a basin of foot-washing water. He was standing in my room lost in thought. When I saw what he was holding in his hand, I secretly yelled that it was not good. That was his pajamas. Speaking of him, he is quite long-lasting. He can wear one pajamas from college to 4 years after marriage. He looked back at me, with a moment of confusion in his eyes. Aren't you married? Why are my things in your room? I smiled and stepped forward, grabbed his collar, and got close to him. His ear tips turned red, and he helplessly looked away. What are you doing? My fingertips were twirling on his full chest. After I got married, my husband has been abroad all the time. You also know that in the deep of the night when I'm lonely, I also need someone to solve my physical needs. Hearing this, he was stunned. So, am I your mistress? Or is it more accurate to say plaything? I opened my mouth but didn't have time to speak. Looking up, I saw him lower his eyes, with a layer of gloom at the end of his eyes. His voice was gloomy. Plaything, that's fine too. I think he is lonely and pitiful at this moment. I was thinking, did I go too far? Qin Xingye is such a proud person. Waking up from a sleep, he became a servant again and also part-time mistress. Wouldn't it be too big a blow? But in the next moment, I was tightly hugged into his arms. With a fierce and resolute meaning, he kissed me on the lips. He was merciless in attacking. Although he lost his memory, his skills in this aspect haven't decreased at all. He stayed in the hospital for half a month, and I haven't had any meat for half a month. At this time, being kissed by him was like thunderbolt meeting dry wood. In a daze, we got entangled on the bed. He was even more intense than usual, making me keep begging for mercy. In the moonlight, those eyes were surging with huge desires and intentions of encroachment. He bit my earlobe, his tone a little fierce. Do you like it? Like it. Be lighter. Compared with your husband, who is better? Speak. He bit my neck. His actions were urgent and violent, urging me. In a daze, I thought, it's not that I don't want to say, it's that I really don't know what to say, brother. Why is it him and not me? Before falling asleep, I felt someone hugging me tightly. And turning around and snuggling into his arms has become some kind of instinct of mine. I rubbed his chin and whispered, "Husband." The body hugged by me slowly stiffened. The next day when I woke up, I subconsciously reached out to touch the person beside me. But all I felt was a cold emptiness. I was instantly awake and got up immediately. When I saw the figure bustling around by the dining table downstairs, I finally felt at ease. Sure enough, habit is a very terrifying thing. When I sat at the dining table, Qin Xingye and the other servants were all standing aside. I reached out and pulled him. "Come and eat. Aren't you hungry after being tired all night?" I was really good at teasing him. He sat down with a somewhat awkward expression. In the middle of eating, he suddenly asked me a bit hesitantly, "Is your husband Bai Xiaoyan?" I almost spat out a mouthful of milk. But I held it back. Looking at his so dejected and absent-minded look, it seemed that Bai Xiaoyan had really left a deep mark in his memory. Speaking of it, Bai Xiaoyan can be considered my first love. In college, Bai Xiaoyan was the senior who was in charge of receiving new students. Unlike Qin Xingye has been an example that elders have used to compare with me since childhood. We had a big fight because of who would play the emperor in a game of house when we were little, and then we formed an unresolvable feud. Coincidentally, our growth trajectories basically overlapped. We would see each other all the time. We had to compete in everything. When I learned to play the piano, his family bought a Steinway. When I learned oil painting, he started to draw sketches. I said I wanted to go to University A. He said he could go to University B. In the end, with a college entrance examination score 30 points higher than mine, he met me at the same university. I said he was haunting me. He said it was a narrow path for us as enemies. On the university campus, we went our separate ways. I was soon swallowed up by the surging crowd. When I was aimless and looked back, Qin Xingye's height and appearance made him stand out and be extremely outstanding among the crowd. I opened my mouth to call out to him, but a girl with a blushing face rushed up and was shyly and nervously asking him for his WeChat. He lowered his eyes. The sunlight was just right, and his pupils were dyed golden. The words were frozen in my mouth. I turned back. I didn't know if he gave his WeChat that day or not. And it was at this time that I met Bai Xiaoyan. He smiled gently at me and asked me, "Little junior, which major and which class are you in?" He was a completely different existence from Qin Xingye. I confessed to him after a club team building party. We went to the amusement park. I said, "Senior, let's compete in archery." There were small dolls as prizes for archery that day. I said you definitely wouldn't win as many as me. At nightfall, people seemed more gentle and tolerant. The night wind blew through his hair. His smile was faint. "In the end, you will definitely win. Because all my dolls will be given to you." I was suddenly stunned. It turned out that someone could admit defeat so easily just because I wanted to win. That night, I confessed, and he nodded. Bai Xiaoyan was a very good boyfriend. He would buy me breakfast and also bring me a bouquet of my favorite flowers on every date. Even if he was extremely busy with his studies and had to stay in the laboratory every day, he would always find time to prepare surprises for me. If there were no subsequent events, perhaps Qin Xingye and I wouldn't have come together. Thinking of this, I couldn't help but look at his profile. My attitude seemed like a default. Qin Xingye didn't wait for my denial. After a long while, he said softly, "I see." Having been used to seeing his high-spirited and unruly appearance. At this time, his look like a wronged little wife made me a bit soft-hearted. "Well, actually I know. I'm just a mistress. I have no right to care so much." 90 degrees of stubbornness, looking up at the sky melancholically. As expected of Qin Xingye. His adaptability is really first class. Just a week after mentioning Bai Xiaoyan, he really returned from abroad. He led a team and joined my cooperative company. When we met at the company, he had completely shed the greenness of his college days. He became much more mature and elegant. He took a sip of coffee. His voice was still gentle. "Yizhen, I always feel that I owe you an apology. When I was still young, I didn't understand Bai Xiaoyan's choice. When he went abroad, I said I would accompany him. At that time, he rarely said seriously to me, 'Yizhen, I don't want your life to change because of me. Why can't I go with you, but you can go abroad with you? You are always doing experiments together every day. Now even going abroad you have to go together. Have you fallen in love with her?' He said, 'Because this is the path she has to take anyway. But it's different for you, Yizhen. In your life plan, there was no such part originally. Don't make such a decision for me. I can't bear it. When I was young, I was stubborn and resolute. Let me go with you, or break up with me.' The later story was that we went our separate ways. He went to the other side of the ocean with the girl who shared his ideals. I once hated Bai Xiaoyan and thought he treated me like this because he had changed his heart. But later when I thought about it, in fact, it is very difficult for everyone to bear the life of another person. Bai Xiaoyan's choice is not wrong either." I shook my head with a smile. "I don't blame you. At that time, I was not sensible." He looked at me, with a glimmer in his eyes. "Have you been doing well all these years?" I nodded. His gaze fell on my wedding ring. "I mean, are you happy?" I thought of someone at home. After being refused by me when he pestered me to go out with me. He shrank back onto the bed like a little wife again, with sadness in his voice. "Yes. I'm a mistress who can't be seen." I smiled slightly, very happy. A trace of loss flashed through Bai Xiaoyan's eyebrows. After a moment of silence, he spoke again. "In fact, I knew the news that you were going to have a flash marriage 2 months after we broke up. I thought about coming back to find you, but it was too late by then. I always feel that it was me who made you make such a hasty decision." "Perhaps." At this point, he looked up at me. There was a certain tentativeness and firmness in his clear eyes. "Everything can be set right." His words made me knock over the coffee in a panic. The scalding liquid startled me. My hand immediately became red and swollen. Bai Xiaoyan suddenly stood up and grabbed my hand. With a clang, the sound of something falling to the ground came from the doorway. Behind the open crack of the door revealed an extraordinarily handsome face. "Oh no, it's my unfortunate husband who has lost his memory." Looking from his eyes, it was Bai Xiaoyan holding my hand. The two of us were looking at each other affectionately and pouring out our hearts. His eyes were filled with redness, and his beautiful lips were pulled into a straight line. He looked so pitiful, as if on the verge of crying. From his perspective, now it was like a male mistress who had risen to power by relying on his beauty bumping into the legal wife returning to the palace. He had to swallow his anger. He spoke hoarsely, "Sorry to disturb." He turned and left. "Hey, Qin Xingye." I immediately pulled back my hand and got up to chase after him. He had long legs. I had to trot for 2 steps before catching him at the elevator entrance. The employees all pretended to work. In fact, their eyes and ears were all paying attention to the gossip on our side. I chased him all the way. At this time, my anger rose a bit. I grabbed his wrist and turned him around. I said you. The remaining words stuck in my throat. His red eyes and aggrieved expression suddenly hit my heart. That little bit of anger subsided instantly. I subconsciously reached out and cupped his face. Oh, what's the matter? So wronged? He waved away my hand. Your husband is back. I'm leaving. Don't. Listen to me. I was thinking maybe I should confess. Damn it, you are my dear husband. Although I really like this delicate and helpless look. But seeing him so uncomfortable, I also feel a bit bad. In fact, you are my Xingye, long time no see. Bai Xiaoyan also caught up at this time. Bai Xiaoyan extended his hand. Qin Xingye looked at his extended hand. The aggrieved expression just now had been restrained. He became indifferent and arrogant again. Dignified. Even as a mistress, he had to be dignified. He reached out and shook hands with Bai Xiaoyan. Long time no see, senior. Well, on the surface everything is fine. It's just that the hand that Qin Xingye was holding with Bai Xiaoyan was so tight that the knuckles turned white. Bai Xiaoyan was a bit puzzled. After all, he had broken up with me for 4 years. There was no need for this, right? But he still issued an invitation. Let's have a meal together. So the 3 of us sat at the same table in an awkward way. Speaking of it, since I started dating Bai Xiaoyan in college, Qin Xingye rarely appeared in my sight. Once when I went home, I met him. He was leaning against the car and smoking. In the smoke, he looked at me. In my impression, he never smoked. I couldn't help frowning. He was slightly stunned. Immediately after, he extinguished the cigarette but in his hand. He asked me, do you really like him? Otherwise? Could it be that I like you? Where am I not as good as him? You are not as good as him in any way. The moonlight cast on his eyebrows and eyes seemed a bit lonely. He softly ummed and then got in the car and drove away. After that, we rarely met. In the past, I always thought that the 2 people who seemed to always run into each other. It turns out that when someone doesn't deliberately meet, they really can't meet. To show hospitality as the host, I let Bai Xiaoyan order first. After he reported several dish names, Qin Xingye's eyebrows and eyes became even colder. Don't you know that she doesn't like spicy food anymore? Bai Xiaoyan's hand holding the menu paused. Then he said, sorry, I don't know very well. So you don't care about her at all? Even someone like Bai Xiaoyan who is so smooth-talking was a bit confused at this moment. Bai Xiaoyan thought, no, I am her ex-boyfriend. You are her husband. How can I care about her? And Qin Xingye became even more angry when he saw Bai Xiaoyan's stunned expression. As if saying, someone who doesn't care about me like this can actually marry me instead of him marrying me. So you have been abroad all these years? Bai Xiaoyan nodded, yes. I led a team abroad. Now that everything is mature, I return to China. In your heart, is work more important or is she more important? This. Do you know how she has lived these years? At this point, I was also a bit surprised. No, how did I live? Thinking about it, from Qin Xingye's current perspective, I am a left-behind woman whose husband has been abroad all year round and doesn't care about me at all. As a result, I can only stay alone in an empty room and have to find a mistress to warm me. Well, it does sound a bit pitiful. Bai Xiaoyan was also confused. I seem to not know very well. Sorry. I always feel that something is strange. I quickly gave him some dishes, trying to stuff his mouth with food. Looking at my actions favoring him, he thought for a moment with a complicated expression. Suddenly, a glimmer of light burst out in his eyes. It startled me. What is he going to do again? Then he spoke. So you are destined to lose her like this. Compared to you, what she cares about more now is me. I finally understand what that glimmer of light was just now. It was the confidence of a mistress provoking the legal wife. Bai Xiaoyan was completely confused, full of question marks. But now Qin Xingye has made up his mind to take the place of the mistress. He kept adding water and picking up dishes for me on the table. He also very actively wiped my mouth with a napkin. Bai Xiaoyan watched our husband and wife showing affection wildly with calmness. But I think at this moment, he should think that Qin Xingye is quite sick. At the time of farewell, Qin Xingye went to get the car. Bai Xiaoyan said to me, I was originally worried that you are not happy now. At that time, you got married to him just on impulse after breaking up. Now it seems that you are very good. I smiled. He has been sick recently and is a bit abnormal. But we are indeed very good. Bai Xiaoyan curved the corner of his mouth. Yizhen, actually when I came back this time, I have been very hesitant. I am afraid that you are not happy, and I am also afraid that you are too happy. But now seeing it with my own eyes still makes me feel that I will be happier for you if you are happy. I pretended not to understand the loss in his words and waved at him with a smile. As you wish, I really haven't changed my life trajectory because of you. We all have a better life. On the way home, when he saw that Bai Xiaoyan didn't come with us, he slightly relaxed. But in the next moment, he became dissatisfied again. He has returned to the country and doesn't go home to accompany you? I nodded. He frowned. What's the use of such a husband? There is a sentence that I don't know if I should say it or not. But as soon as we got home, he threw me on the bed, and overwhelming kisses immediately fell. His words were slurred but contained strong dissatisfaction. What do you like about him? Why don't you divorce him? I really thought about this question. Answered him, because he doesn't compete with me for victory or defeat. Unlike a certain annoying guy. His movement paused. There was a moment of sadness in his beautiful eyes. Then I won't compete with you for victory or defeat anymore. Isn't it okay? In the past 20-some years, I couldn't even imagine that Qin Xingye would say such words to me with such an expression. My shock now can be described as being so shocked that my jaw drops. Amnesia is really a good thing. After he finished speaking, he looked into my eyes a little embarrassedly, leaned down, and kissed my ear. Taking my hand and letting me touch his body, is my figure not as good as his? Or am I not as good looking as him? Or am I? His hand led me to touch under him. My old face flushed, and my legs had involuntarily wrapped around his waist. Male competition is sometimes so simple and direct. After a few days, I took him to the hospital for a re-examination again. After the doctor examined him, he told me, the blood stasis in his brain is almost dissipated. It is estimated that in a few days, after the blood stasis is dissolved, the symptom of amnesia will disappear. After hearing this, a faint sadness welled up in my heart. The soft and easy-to-bully Qin Xingye is about to disappear. So reluctant. He noticed my gaze and looked back at me. Why do you have such an expression? Is my condition very bad? I shook my head. It's very good. It's just that you can't be my mistress for a few days. You will become my husband again soon. I threw myself into Qin Xingye's arms and didn't see the expression of the person in my arms change. Qin Xingye thought, her husband is back. She really doesn't want me anymore. I felt the person hugging me tighten his arms forcefully. Like holding the last handful of fire that he doesn't want to lose. A few days later, a press conference was held about a new cooperation project. Bai Xiaoyan also came to the scene as the director of the technical department team of the cooperative company. The media had entered the venue in advance. When I went on stage to be interviewed, it was live broadcasted throughout. I answered all the questions of the media appropriately. To build up momentum for the new project, the media also asked about emotional matters at the end. President Yi and your husband are also well-known loving couples in the business world. I don't know if there was a discussion with your husband when making the decision on this project cooperation? This title of loving couple is a bit ridiculous when mentioned. That seemed to be the second year after I got married to Qin Xingye. Because at a banquet that night, it was raining. The car was parked in the courtyard. There was still a distance of 50 meters to walk in. Qin Xingye held me in his arms. I hooked his neck with one hand and held up a black umbrella with the other hand, snuggling in his arms. That photo was taken and put on the internet. With a fateful BGM, the two of us became popular on the internet. Later, our identities were uncovered. Netizens were crazy about it and said that there is really love in the rich and powerful families. And the story behind that photo is actually, "You carry me in. Is your leg broken? You want me to carry you? I can't get my shoes wet. Will you carry me? If you don't, I'll let Xiao Liu carry me. Xiao Liu is our bodyguard." He snorted coldly, got out of the car first, and carried me in against the wind and rain. And I conveniently held up an umbrella for him. Thinking of Qin Xingye, the corner of my mouth slightly curved up, my husband did help me with advice. In fact, whether in life or in career, he has given me a lot of advice and help. I am very grateful to him. And I love him very much. It was almost a thoughtless sentence. Only after I finished speaking did I uncontrollably feel a trace of regret welling up from the bottom of my heart. I don't know how Qin Xingye will tease me after he regains his memory. I slightly sighed and finally managed to endure until the end of the live broadcast. As soon as I picked up my phone, I found that the calls from home were almost blowing up my phone. I was startled. Aunt Liu rarely called me so many times. The assistant who came over was also extremely anxious. "President Yi, President Qin, he is missing." "Missing?" I quickly called him and found that his phone was turned off. Aunt Liu said that they had searched everywhere near home but there was no one. I immediately decided to go back quickly. The assistant stopped me. "President Yi, there will be a dinner with the cooperative company later. Help me push it off." But I didn't have time to listen to her finish and rushed home in a hurry. Aunt Liu quickly came forward and said, "President Qin didn't know what happened. After watching the live broadcast on TV, he was in a daze for a long time. Then he went out and hasn't come back until now." I frowned and quickly thought about where he might have gone. He should not have gone to find his parents. Otherwise, the two elders would definitely call me. There was no news from his brothers either. Where else could he be? I was so anxious at home that I walked around in circles twice. Suddenly, I had an inspiration and thought of a place. A secret base. When I rushed there, he was indeed there. Sitting alone on the swing, he looked very lonely. I unconsciously slowed down and walked in front of him, squatted down, and looked up at him. When I reached for his hand, he avoided it. "Why did you run out by yourself? You don't divorce him because you really love him, right? For me, you actually don't have any liking at all. You just simply treat me as a tool, right?" He lowered his eyes. The sadness in his eyes was almost tangible. Something vague in my heart became clear. His memory at this time was stuck at 21 years old. So, buying a Steinway is to let me play the piano at his house, right? Learning to paint like me is to go on an outdoor sketching trip with me, right? Getting 30 points more than me in the college entrance examination and still coming to University A. Is it also because he wants to go to the same university as me? I grabbed his finger somewhat forcefully. "You like me, right?" Tears condensed between his eyelashes. His eyes were slightly red. "I can't like you anymore, Yizhen. You simply don't like me at all." His voice was already choked with sobs. My heart suddenly ached. I stood up and buried his face in my waist. His hand wrapped around my waist and refused to let go. Warm tears dampened my clothes. He said, "What should I do? What can I do to not be so sad?" My hand comfortingly stroked his hair. But in my heart, I was tickled by his tears. Sure enough, a man's tears are a woman's stimulant. I coaxed him in a low voice, "Let's go home." Come home with me, okay? Baby. He looked up at me. There was still a thin redness after crying at the end of his eyes. His voice was hoarse and even more sexy. That's not my home. I lowered my head and kissed his lips. My fingertips gently rubbed his earlobe. Then get in the car with me. Getting in the car is also fine. So I lured him into the car and had my way with him. In a daze, I felt someone pick me up and take me home. This time it wasn't my initiative. The next day, the sun was just right. I stretched and woke up beautifully. The person in my arms was warm and smelled good. I rubbed against his chest. Before I could even open my eyes, I said, "Good morning." "Good morning." Steady and crisp. This tone is not quite right. I suddenly opened my eyes. Qin Xingye was propping his head with one hand, leaning against the head of the bed. With the other hand, he was slowly twirling the end of my hair. Looking at me, he curved his eyes. His eyes were like autumn waters cutting pupils, and there was a bone-chilling coolness. This feeling. Oh no. I immediately got up and wanted to run but was pressed down again by someone. You run so fast. Are you afraid that your husband will suddenly come back and see me, this mistress? The words mistress were enunciated heavily and fiercely. I chuckled. Husband, you have regained your memory? I missed you so much. Don't be glib. You know what you did. As he spoke, his nose had already lowered and was nudging the belt of my pajamas. I felt my physical condition. Well, a certain place is sore. Another time is probably not possible. I quickly pushed away his furry head. What did I do? I took care of you without leaving your side during your illness. But some people actually had deep affection for me long ago. Hearing me say this, he stopped a bit unnaturally. You're so smug. Sure enough, the soft and easy to manipulate Qin Xingye before has disappeared. I leaned against his chest again and talked together by the head of the bed. At this time, I suddenly realized that actually I missed him a little. Missed him, the current him. Why didn't you confess to me back then? His tone was sour. Weren't you in love with your good senior back then? Hey, don't be jealous of him. If it weren't for him, we might not have gotten married so quickly. Why do you say that? In fact, I had a rather painful period after breaking up. When I was drunk and collapsed on the steps. Suddenly a face appeared in my field of vision, blocking the starry sky in my eyes. Qin Xingye reached out and touched my forehead. Are you sick? I was rarely calm and waved away his hand. Qin Xingye, my love is dead. Do you understand? He squatted down above my head. Isn't it just that love is dead? What's the big deal? It's easy to say. When I woke up, I was lying on my own bed. My mom came in and asked me, what happened last night? You were so drunk. When Xiao Yi sent you home, he said you were chasing and biting his heel outside. This is slander. This is pure slander. But in an instant, Qin Xingye's eyes full of banter and sarcasm appeared in my mind. In the dark night, with a shallow smile, he said to me, isn't it just that love is dead? It's easy to say. Then let your love die too. I grabbed my mom's hand and said, actually, I like Qin Xingye. Go and propose an alliance with the Qin family. Qin Xingye's parents like me very much. Most likely they will be very willing. This will definitely disgust Qin Xingye terribly. Won't he cry, make a fuss, and threaten to commit suicide at home? I won't say who is extremely satisfied. I was smilingly waiting at home for the great news of Qin Xingye's breakdown. As a result, a day later, the Qin family replied. Agreed. When will the wedding be held? The macaron in my hand fell to the ground with a thud. I went too far. Really went too far. Then what should I do? I asked my mom to propose an alliance, and then I say I don't want to do it anymore? Then I will be laughed at by Qin Xingye until I become a laughingstock. In a daze, I arrived at the wedding scene. When we were exchanging rings, I came to my senses. I asked him, "Why didn't you refuse?" There was a moment of unnaturalness on his expression. "Didn't you want to disgust me?" He maliciously curled the corner of his mouth and whispered in my ear, "Let's see who disgusts who now. When you cry and make a fuss and want a divorce later, I won't agree." Just in time for the background music of the priest's vow. For richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, we will love each other until forever. I nudged his waist and asked, "So do we have to thank Bai Xiaoyan?" He ummed and said, "It's barely reasonable." He got up and put on his clothes. I looked at his back. Broad shoulders and a wide back. The sunlight streamed in from the window and fell on him. His skin was even more fair and smooth. The golden light dyed his jet black hair golden. I couldn't help but pounce over and hug his waist. A question suddenly popped up. "Hey, at the beginning of freshman year, a girl asked you for your WeChat. Did you give it to her?" After hearing this, he narrowed his eyes and smiled like a fox. "I won't tell you." And at that time, he pointed to my back in the crowd. "See? That's the girl I like."